All right, again, welcome. Thank you so much for being here this morning. We're glad to spend some time with you this morning to go through our FY27 How to Apply webinar for the Grants for Organizations program. We're specifically going to look at the revision process that we recently went through and the new application that came out of that process. If I haven't met you before, my name is Laura Weiss. I am a program director here at the Maryland State Arts Council, and I am joined by my co-program director, Emily Sollenberger. We're going to be going through a lot of information this morning, so let's go ahead and dive in. Like I did say before we officially began the session, we are recording this today, so we know this is a lot of information that's going to be coming at you. So that recording will be available shortly. We'll share it on our website. We'll also email it to our current GFO grantees as well, so you have that for reference. But just to orient you here, if you're not familiar with Google Meet, this is just a reference shot of features. Like I said before, since we are recording this, we do want to minimize background noise as much as possible. So if you are not speaking, we ask that you please use the microphone icon and make sure that you remain on mute. That should be down towards the lower left-hand corner of your screen. Just be aware of the camera icon as well. You can feel free to be on or off camera, however you are comfortable is fine by us. There's also the closed captioning, the little CC with the box around it. If you do need closed captions, please feel free to turn this on. Just know that it is computer generated. Also, I just want to note that due to some different regulations, we don't allow any kind of AI note takers into our public meetings. So if we do see any kind of note takers or anything of that sort, we will be removing them from the meeting. And apologies for any complications that might cause. Also know that there is the raise hand function, which is the little hand with a circle around it. We're going to ask that you hold on any questions throughout the presentation. We have a lot of information to cover and a lot of it builds off of one another. So the question that you might have on one slide likely might be answered a couple of slides later. So we're going to ask that you hold on any questions until the very end. We'll have plenty of time for questions then, and you can use the raise hand at that point. Also, there is the chat function, which is the little quotation box, likely towards the lower right-hand corner of your screen. You can feel free to use this chat throughout the presentation. If you want to drop any questions or comments in there, we will take a look at those at the end, and we'll read through them and do our best to address everything then. We're going to start our presentation here with a couple of grounding slides. We begin all of our public sessions with these slides. I will read all of them out loud for accessibility purposes. And the first is our land acknowledgement statement. And that is that we acknowledge the lands and waters, now known as Maryland, are the home of its first peoples. The Accohonic Indian Tribe, Assateague Peoples Tribe, Cedar Band of Piscataway Indians, Choptico Band of Indians, Lenape Tribe, Nanticoke Tribe, Nassau-Wawash Band of Indians, Piscataway Conoy Tribe, Piscataway Indian Nation, Pocomoke Indian Nation, Susquehannock Indians, Youghiogheny River Band of Shawnee, and tribes in the Chesapeake watershed who have seemingly vanished since the coming of colonialism. We acknowledge that this land is now home to other tribal peoples living here in diaspora. We acknowledge the forced removal of many from the lands and waterways that nurtured them as kin. We acknowledge the degradation that continues to be wrought on the land and waters in pursuit of resources. We acknowledge the right of the land and waterways to heal so that they can continue to provide food and medicine for all. We acknowledge that it is our collective obligation to pursue policies and practices that respect the land and waters so that our reciprocal relationship with them can be fully restored. And you can find out more about this statement, how it was developed, and more on our website, msac.org. Next is our equity and justice statement, and that is that the arts celebrate our state's diversity, connect our shared humanity, and transform individuals and communities. The Maryland State Arts Council is committed to advancing and modeling equity, diversity, accessibility, and inclusion in all aspects of our organization and across communities of our state. MSAC and its grantees are committed to embracing equity and non-discrimination regardless of race, religious creed, color, age, gender expression, sexual orientation, disability, class, language, and/or ability. Next here is the vision of the Maryland State Arts Council, which is to play an essential role ensuring every person has access to the transformative power of the arts. And we do that through our mission, which is to advance the arts in our state by providing leadership that champions creative expression, diverse programming, equitable access, lifelong learning, and the arts as a celebrated contributor to the quality of life for all of the people of Maryland. Next here, you'll see some information from our recently adopted strategic plan. These are our pillars and our goals. Those include access, awareness, connection, equity, and leadership. Next up here, you'll see what we call our creative meeting actions. And these are just some ideas to keep in the back of your mind as we go through today's presentation together. And that is to celebrate being in the space with other creative people, engage with everyone's presence as a gift, acknowledge that together we know a lot, enter the conversation with curiosity and inquiry, share your idea and trust that it will be heard, use I statements, focus your language on the task at hand, hold one another accountable with care, honor all perspectives and build on shared ideas, and balance speaking with listening. Next here is just some information about our professional development that we offer here at the Maryland State Arts Council. We have a lot going on. It feels like the school year just kind of kicked in and we have a lot of sessions and a lot of things that we are offering right now. So in addition to info sessions like this, right now there's a lot of different info sessions happening as grant applications are opening for the year. We also hold topic-specific sessions. Yesterday, for example, we had a webinar with Maryland Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts about fiscal sponsorships. We offer those from time to time, generally in a webinar format. We also hold on various Tuesday mornings what we call Coffee with the Council, which is kind of an open forum and dialogue just to talk with constituents, with MSAC staff, and with council members as well, sometimes about specific topics, sometimes just an open conversation. We're also actively holding a lot of office hours right now throughout the state. These are in-person events. On Friday evening, I was down in Leonardtown having office hours down there in St. Mary's County. These are just opportunities for us to actually have time face-to-face in person with grantees, with people who are interested in becoming grantees, just to talk about what we do here at the State Arts Council. If you are in Baltimore City, we will be having office hours during the Bromo Arts Walk on this Thursday evening, actually, at Lamondo. So if you happen to be around, please join us. And lastly, we also partner with Maryland Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts for the Maryland Arts Summit every year. That really happens in June. So that happened a couple of months ago. There'll be more information about next year's event shortly, but check out our Eventbrite page for more information. And lastly here, just to call out some ways to get involved. We are frequently looking for members of the public to join us, often as panelists, which are the ones that are actually reviewing applications and scoring applications. Sometimes we need editors, which are individuals who are looking to revise programs, which you're going to hear a lot about the editors today that work through the GFO revision process. All of these are really important ways for the public to be involved in what we do. So if that's something that's of interest to you, check out the Ways to Get Involved page for current calls. Like I said, there's a lot coming up, so I can't remember if there's anything currently on there, but if there's not, there will be very soon. And it's important to point out that all of our those kind of contributors, whether that's editors or panelists, they are paid, they're compensated positions. All right, here we are at today's agenda. Like I said, we have a lot of ground to cover. So we are holding the space for 2 hours until 1 o'clock. We don't know if it will take entirely that, to the 1 o'clock point, but we wanted to allow for plenty of time for questions and anything that we can help with at the end. So what we're going to do is begin with just a review of the Grants for Organizations program. That's GFO. You're going to hear that acronym a lot today, GFO. Then we're going to talk about the eligibility guidelines for that program. Next, we're going to really dive into the revision process, what we did and what came out of that. And that includes the new full application process. We'll then talk about the GFO timeline and what the next steps look like as you kind of come into this year, what's next for you, what you need to be thinking about. And we'll also talk about the funding formula that is used in the GFO program. Lastly, we're going to wrap up with just a quick review of Smart Simple, which is our grants platform. And then hopefully we should have plenty of time for questions and answers at the end. All right, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Emily to give us just an overview of the GFO program.
Great, thanks, Laura, and good morning, everybody. I'll note that I'm having a bit of an internet issue, so if I go missing, Laura will jump in. But it's so great to see so many familiar names and faces and also some new folks here. So just to kind of start, we want to note that, again, this is a presentation, the overview of our Grants for Organization revision process, along with more of a focus on the full FY27 application today. We did host a couple of information sessions already that were more central to the intent to apply process for our new organizations coming into the program for the first time going into the FY27 cycle. That recording is posted on the website along with the slide deck for reference. So if you feel like you want to go back to that, it is there for you as a resource. Okay, so just to kind of give a quick overview of the Grants for Organization program. I know many of you have been in the program for a long time, so we'll just do a quick overview here. But again, just a reminder that this program provides general operating support to our organizations across the state. So really strengthening the arts infrastructure with support to our organizations. In FY26, which is our current fiscal year that just started on July 1st, we were able to get notifications out to about 305 organizations, which spread about $18 million across all of those organizations. And we'll note this several times throughout today's presentation, but to start, and we'll go into more detail about this, there's only going to be one GFO deadline, application deadline each year. So typically in the past, you had either a November 15 or December 15. All applications will be due on November 15th moving forward. So no two deadlines. So mark Saturday, November 15th by 11:59 p.m. As your deadline for the upcoming GFO application. We'll also note that Laura and I are happy to help along the way and provide technical assistance. We do work some kind of normal business hours, which is Monday through Friday. Typically, we're in the available 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. So just want to note that we know that this deadline falls on a Saturday. We will not be available on that Saturday, the 15th, for any last minute technical support. So just make sure you're aware of our availability too. If you are a returning applicant, meaning you received a GFO award just recently, either end of July into the beginning of August, so your FY26 GFO award, again, you've already been accepted into the GFO program and you do not need to complete an intent to apply application. That is currently available for our new organizations, but you do not need to do that if you're already in the program and received FY26 notification. You'll move straight to that November 15 application. By chance, if you are a new applicant, meaning you did not receive FY26 funding or a notification yet, you are required to submit an intent to apply application, which is due September 15th. Then if you're accepted into the program, you would then submit the full application on November 15th. We'll note here, if you are a new organization and you do not submit an intent to apply, or perhaps it just wasn't approved, it's not a good fit, you will not be able to then submit a full application for FY27 funding. So if you're confused in any way of where you might fall within these kind of new, or if you're in the cycle, just send a note to Laura or myself and we'll be able to clarify any of that. Okay, so we'll move into kind of the general eligibility and use of funds for the GFO program. So to start, who can apply? There's a couple different types of organizations. First off, there's our arts organizations to get kind of that general operating support. So that's our nonprofit organizations whose purpose is producing or presenting the arts through public programs or services. So these applicants can be arts organizations or organizations whose mission and purpose is producing or presenting the arts through public programs or services. So these would be our typical art museums, orchestras, galleries, theaters, art centers, etc. So our arts-based organizations with an arts-based mission. There's also a category that we call arts programs, and some of you might know that you're an arts program, but just to clarify that these are organizations whose primary purpose is other than producing or presenting the arts, but you would provide ongoing public arts activities or public programs throughout the year. So the mission of your organization might not specifically be dedicated to the arts, but you have a significant ongoing arts program or perhaps couple programs. So again, you would be considered a non-arts organization for the State Arts Council purposes, but we would include you in kind of this arts program category in the GFO program. So examples here might be community centers, places of worship, non-art museum, libraries, or colleges and universities, those folks that have a significant arts program. Some other kind of eligibility points to be aware of is that our arts organizations and arts programs, you must be a 501c3 nonprofit or a unit of government or perhaps a school. Our organizations can be fiscally sponsored under a Model A agreement. So there are a handful of organizations that might fall in this category. If you're not sure what a fiscal sponsorship is or what this means, you probably are not in that relationship with another organization. But if you are fiscally sponsored, this would be something we could accept if you're in a Model A agreement. You also must be incorporated in Maryland as a nonprofit or have a significant physical presence in Maryland. You also must have operated as an arts organization or arts program for at least one full fiscal year and be able to submit a financial statement for your most recently completed fiscal year at the time of application. Previously, we had a threshold of allowable income of $50,000 for several years to join the GFO program. We have shifted that as part of the revision process to $10,000. So again, you must have an allowable income number of $10,000 or more to join the GFO program. And this really aligns with some shifts that we're making with the Creativity Grant Program for general operating support. And we'll get into that a little bit more later with the revision section. So what the GFO program can support, it can support your general operations. So this is not a project-specific grant program. This is really intended funds to support your ongoing programming and operations throughout the year for your organization. So this could include things like program materials and supplies, marketing and promotional activity and expenses, any personnel and associated expenses with personnel, your operations to run a facility that could include rent or a mortgage, utilities, internet. It could also include professional development activities. So really thinking about those core expenses that you incur annually throughout the year. There are some things that the GFO funding cannot support. So there's a list here. Things like re-granting or scholarships are not allowed. Anything connected to capital improvements or renovation, large equipment, those sorts of things. Activities that are not open to the public. So we heard that a little bit earlier in the other slides that we want to support public programming. So things that are not open to the public, these funds could not support. Activities that are primarily therapeutic in nature. Any travel outside of the state, we really want to keep the funds within the state of Maryland. And as with any State Arts Council grants, these funds cannot be used for political contributions. And if you're not sure, that's what Laura and I are here for. We can talk through any questions that you might have about how you might intend to use the funds. All right, I'm going to hand it back to Laura to go through the revision process.
All right, thanks so much, Emily. So here we are. This is the revision process. This has been a very long process. We're very excited to share this with you. So just to give a little bit of background, you know, as Emily said, this is really our major funding program. It's really our flagship funding program here at the State Arts Council and has been for many years. It last underwent a significant editing process for the full program. Some of you might remember this in 2018. And then there was also another revision process in 2021 that specifically looked at the funding formula. So there have been changes, you know, in recent years, but the last time it went through a full revision process was 2018. Since then, and some of this even predated that, there's really been multiple steps that have been involved with the GFO program, and there's been kind of this 3-year cycle that the GFO program ran on. So the program, it used to include the intent to apply application for new organizations. There were 2 different applications referred to as the on-year and the off-year. You've already heard us use those terms a couple of times here, but the on-year and the off-year had different application types. The on-year, that was what was reviewed by public panelists, and that typically happened once every 3 years. That process included the review of a long written application. It also had an artistic site visit and an in-depth conversation. Those were known as extension assignments. And it all culminated in a panel meeting, a public panel meeting, which resulted in a panel percentage score. So that process typically happened once every 3 years. The staff reviewed the applications and the financial statements for all of the various applications that were submitted. And there was also a final report that was due every August 15th in the summertime. Just for kind of the flip side of the coin, just for a little bit of context, there's also another program currently that supports general operations, and that's the Creativity Grant. So some of you that are listening might have received or applied to the Creativity Grant. And that was looking at general operating funds from FY19 through FY26 for organizations that were not receiving funding through the GFO program or through some of our other programs, including county arts agencies and the arts and entertainment districts and the Folklife Network. And that might have been for various reasons, whether an organization was not eligible to receive funding through the GFO program, if an organization didn't apply or wasn't approved, various reasons that they might have gone through the Creativity Grant program instead. But just as a very brief overview, that Creativity Grant, it's a rolling basis. So that means that organizations can apply pretty much any time, generally between July and March. Those applications and grants, they were reviewed monthly, and the grants were available for up to $4,000 most years. And it was a brief application, just 3 questions that was a part of that. There were no extension assignments or anything associated with that. And then there was a final report also associated with that. So Emily and I have been on staff for just over 6 years now. We joined together on the same day in 2019, and we oversee both the GFO program and the Creativity Grant program, along with some others. So we've had several years of experience now with both of these programs, and based on our own experience and based on the experience and feedback of panelists, grantees, our colleagues, various constituents, we decided that it was really time to look at a full editing process throughout FY25 last year to address some overarching issues and questions that we were consistently coming back to. And those issues really included the inherent nature of panelist subjectivity. Our panelists are amazing and they go through really extensive training, but you can't completely remove panelist subjectivity, no matter how much training you do. It's just an inherent part of it. So we've noticed that over the years and we wanted to address it. We also noticed that there were significant variances in scoring, and that came year to year, panel to panel. Sometimes, even within, a given group of panelists, we had different groupings looking at different applications, and we would see different scoring trends. And we thought that was really an issue when you look at those variances. We kept coming back to this question of what is really essential in the process to provide funding and support to grantees. That's what really was driving us. What do we really need to know? So we kept asking that question, and you're going to see that throughout this revision process. And we also really had to take into consideration the substantial growth in the GFO program, and also just the growing demand and needs that are out there for general operating support as other funding sources diminish. We also have to consider our own capacity when looking at technical support for applying organizations. When we started, there were roughly 200 organizations in the GFO program. Now we are well over 300 and have other programs as well. So there's just a growing demand that we have. And there's also, you have not only the grantees to support, but also the panelists to support. So there's just that growing, need to support and also manage a large amount of panelists as well. So these were all the things that we were thinking about as we went into this. So we began this GFO editing process just a little over a year ago, late summer 2024, when we had a public call for editors. From that public call, we selected 10 individuals with all kinds of different levels of experience. Most of them had experience directly with the GFO program, either as a grantee or a previous GFO panelist. So they were really familiar with the program as it stood. And they were selected to review the materials and develop policy recommendations. At the same time, we also surveyed the current GFO grantees, and we got a pretty good response. We had 51 organizations share their thoughts and opinions with us. At about this time last year, we also began research with the staff at the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies, NASA for short, and they helped us really compile some research about national trends and best practices in general operating support and just grant making as a whole. So once we had those those editors selected, we held 3 editor meetings in October and November of last year. These were virtual. We all came together and we had staff guided conversations that were really about the issues and possible policies that we wanted them to consider. We gave all kinds of reading and other things for them to complete in between meetings as homework. And then the group came back together to discuss and came to a consensus of ideas and recommendations to work towards. After that, in the wintertime, we held 2 public listening sessions, which many of you attended. We had over 110 people join for those. And we shared at that point what the editor recommendations were. Overall, we heard very positive response. There was general agreement on these proposals. So we took all of those pieces together, and Emily and I worked to develop those recommendations. We consulted with staff, and we kept our council apprised of the work throughout as we developed those new policies. In May and June, we presented these to the committees and the council voted to approve all of our recommended changes. So when we went through this editing process, there were really 3 major topics that we gave to the editors to really drive those conversations. So those 3 questions were, One, what is essential in the GFO process to provide funding to arts organizations? Two, should there be a role for the public as a panelist or some other kind of reviewer role in the process? And three, building off of the last two discussions, is there a new GFO structure entirely to consider? So that's what we were really using as kind of our guideposts as we went through this process. And those questions, what you're going to see, what we're going to present, it's really the results of this new process that we're going to share with you today. So what we heard from the editors regarding the application, the editors in general felt that, general information about an organization, meaning, your mission, your vision, your programming, all of that kind of basic information, they felt that is important to know about from an organization within the application. However, they felt that their significant application changes were needed for that on-year or full application. So that big, long one that had 13 or 14 narrative questions, they felt really significant changes were needed to that. They suggested that we consider adding some kind of section that had goals or benchmarks that were set by the organization within the written application. And they also felt that financials and the organizational attachments in the application, they could remain the same. No changes were really needed there. Regarding the public role, the editors really felt that yes, there is a role for the public in this process, but there was that concern with consistency of the panelists and their reviews from year to year. They really noted that there is value in the public involvement with the organizations, and there's that direct connection since these are public dollars, that involving the public is a really important point in this process. So thinking about all of that, there was this consideration of implementing a compliance model plus artistic visits. There was just a general consensus of removing panel meetings and scoring elements from the process. And then thinking about all of that together, there was also the consideration of a new cycle structure to account for the growing number of organizations and therefore the growing number of applications and visits that were needed every year. So that was a lot of information that we went through, but the overall goals of this revised GFO program, which we're about to share with you what that new process will look like. The overall goals are really thinking about an increase in equity and accessibility. So the removal of scoring, that really helps to eliminate any kind of bias which leads to inequitable reviews of applications. Also, thinking about more organizations will be able to now apply for funding. So more organizations are going to be eligible to receive that general operating support through this new process. And overall, we are looking to simplify, shorten, and streamline. That's a really, really important thing to us. We want to make this a simple process overall. The less time that you are spending on our application, that means that is more time for you to be working on the great things that your organization does. So that's really important to us as well. And again, all of this circles back to an increase in equity and access to all of the organizations across. So all of those things in mind, I'm going to hand it over to Emily to talk about the various applications now.
Great, thanks so much, Laura. As I noted at the beginning here, we already had a full session on the intent to apply application, but we do want to hit on some of those changes, as Laura mentioned, that came out of the revision process, just so you've got a good understanding of what's happening in terms of the full process. So on this, just kind of to start off, just a reminder that if you are an organization that received a GFO notification for FY26 funding, again, you do not need to complete the intent to apply. This is for our new organizations that did not receive FY26 funding and are coming in for the FY27 cycle for perhaps the first time or perhaps lapsed a year and coming back. So just want to go through, kind of what the intent to apply looks like. So the intent to apply application is primarily focused on eligibility and compliance. of the organization coming into the program. So again, if your intent to apply is then approved, this does not guarantee funding. It simply means that you're invited to complete the full application to then be considered for funding. And I'll go into that a little bit more when we get to the full application. So one of the bigger changes with the intent to apply is that we're asking for more in-depth information up front in the intent to apply, more than we've done in the previous process. It's when we hit the full application, if you're invited to submit, that's when the significant changes in the shortened application comes into play compared to the previous version. So again, our goal is really getting those details concerning your organization's eligibility and compliance up front through the intent to apply process, and then move to that fully kind of streamlined application process annually. So I'm going to go through this a little bit quickly, since it's not going to apply to many of you here, but again, the intent to apply, it's going to be asking for general organization information as we do, along with some eligibility questions. So you can see on your screen, we're thinking about just getting information about your artistic category, making sure you're hitting those eligibility points of operating for at least a full fiscal year, supplying your mission, vision, and values, ongoing listing of ongoing programs that you offer to the public. Additionally, here there's some information about the type of organization you are, making sure you have that significant presence here in Maryland, and really getting more information about your geographic area of service as well. We also are going to ask a little bit about the operations and the structure of your organization. So just ensuring that you've got a board of directors or some other kind of governing body. There's some questions around the types of folks that you have connected to your organization, who makes up your entire kind of staffing and organizational structure, and also asking for a graphic of that structure. We also will be asking a little bit about your long-term or your strategic planning within the intent to apply. There's also financial questions and information we'll be asking for. Not a lot of this has changed from previous years. The one thing that that has changed is that we'll be making sure that you have at least $10,000 in allowable income to then apply for the full application. And that, again, is that change from a $50,000 threshold to $10,000. So that's a big change here for this process. We're also asking a little bit more about the financial statements, just to make sure that you can provide your most recently completed financial statement at the time of application, and a little bit more information around the kind of procedures and financial oversight that you have as an organization. So that's kind of the information we'll be asking about up front for our new organizations coming into the program. And if you are a new organization then coming into the program, and you'll be, and if you're approved to move forward to the full application, you would move into this kind of next application with the rest of the folks that have been in the program since FY26. So here's the kind of quick overview of what we'll be asking for in the full application. So again, general organization information, and asking for some updates if you have that around your organization information. Ensuring that you have a unique entity identifier, or UEI, that is required. And just as a reminder, this is somewhat new. It's replacing that DUNS number. So this is required from the federal government. So the difference here is the DUNS used to be a series of numbers. UEI is now a series of numbers and letters. So just make sure you're moving through that process if you have not obtained that UEI just yet. If you are in a fiscal sponsorship relationship with an organization, we'll be asking for that information up front. The other piece, and we'll get into this in a little bit more details, is we're going to be asking for some more information in a different area. We'll be asking for some updates within your organizational profile rather than the application itself. So we'll go into that a little bit more. We'll also be asking some eligibility questions, some program details, financials, and some attachments. So that's kind of the quick overview of it. Moving forward into that kind of organizational profile information. So again, this is a new piece. So instead of asking for updates on your general organizational information within the application itself each year, we'll be directing you to make any updates or changes annually in your organizational profile that's set up in Smart Simple. So when you log in, you kind of have your organizational profile section that's built into your dashboard. You'll be making some updates there. And then that information will just be pulled automatically into the application. So again, it might be things that might not change all the time, but if there is a change, you'll be directed to go there to make those updates. And one of those pieces, which you might remember from the application in previous years, is providing your mission, vision, goals, and values. So again, there'll be a space provided in your profile to keep this information updated throughout the year, but we'll be sending a reminder to you to make those updates when it comes to the GFO submission time. We'll also be asking for your annual programming. So many of you remember that we had an activities chart that had 4 different kind of categories, and you had to list all the things and fill out all the boxes. We're going back to more of a 2-page summary of your annual arts program. So asking for a listing with a short description of each activity. The list of activities and events can be categorized as a program type. And we've also made those recommendations in the past when you're filling out your activities chart. So kind of taking that same idea of these buckets of programming. So if you have a main stage season, maybe you have youth classes and adult classes, maybe you have some other additional education opportunities, exhibition series. We're not looking for all of the individual, plays and productions or individual exhibitions, just really kind of those buckets of programming that you would put in a 2-page summary that's presented each year. Again, that will go into your organizational profile rather than the application itself. We'll also be asking if you're an arts program. So again, those are the folks that you might not have an arts-based mission. You might be a non-arts organization that's has a significant public arts programming. So we'll ask you to complete that annual programming information with all of your programs, non-arts and arts-based, just so we can get a better sense of the percentage of programming that is indeed arts-based. So we'll ask that when you include your list of programs, just indicate what's arts-based and what you think is non-arts-based. And again, if you've got any questions around that, you can be in touch with us and we can kind of walk through a strategy there with you. So that's it with the kind of the organizational profile updates. Then there'll be an eligibility section as well. So this is just confirming, does your organization have ongoing programs to produce or present the arts to the public? So there'll be a drop down, yes or no. You'll be asked, is your organization incorporated in Maryland or have a significant physical presence in Maryland? And again, there's a drop down that says, yes, no, and if you have significant presence, if you're non-Maryland. We'll also ask, has your organization operated for 1 full fiscal year? And that'll be a yes or no. Also within the eligibility section, we'll be asking, does your organization have an authorized financial statement for its most recently completed fiscal year at the time of application? And a note here is that if you are an organization that has allowable income that is over $750,000, you'll be required to submit an audited financial statement. If you are an organization that is under that $750,000 threshold, a profit and loss statement or something similar would be acceptable. So, and there's more details around the financials in the attachment section as well, but this is really just confirming that you will indeed have that information. We also are going to ask you to tell us a little bit about your organizational structure and to click all the groups that apply here. So that would be if you have a board of directors with officers or another type of governing body. You would click the box next to if you have paid staff. So that would be full-time, part-time, contractual, any kind of paid employees and paid staff. We'll also ask if you have volunteers, and those volunteers could serve as staff within a committee place or another type of volunteer. So you would just click the boxes if you have any of those groups. We'll also ask for your artistic category that most accurately characterizes the work of your organization. And again, there's a list of the different types of disciplines, and there's also will be a drop-down menu, and you'll just select which is the closest to your organization. And again, most of you know those already, but if you have any questions there or feel like you need to shift, just let us know. So that's really it for the eligibility. That's really just making sure we're connecting to the guidelines and making sure you're in compliance with all those eligibility categories. Then we're moving into the program details. So the information that you'll be providing us kind of in a more fuller context within the application. So this is some new information here, some new kind of this big shift that Laura was mentioning that came from the editors. Along with kind of thinking about our streamlined processes. So to start, we're going to ask that organizations share 5 significant updates and or highlights about your organization from the past fiscal year. So these could include significant changes to your mission, vision, goals of the organization. It could include shifts in your staffing and leadership, operations, programming, or other artistic activities, big changes in your finances. So within your response, this is really including kind of the steps the organization has taken to address those changes and any additional details to why these changes occurred. So this is kind of a pull from our off-year application for those of you that have completed that. Also thinking about when we're asking questions in our reporting, we ask a similar question. So we really want to be consistent here and hear from you about what's happening, what's changing, how can we perhaps support you further when you're providing this information to us in an application. There is a note here that we ask that you must include at least 1 update, but you can include up to 5 total. If you're a new organization coming into the program, you might consider including at least 3 updates, just again, so we get a better sense of what's happening with your organization. Another reminder here too, thinking about the information you're providing in your organizational profile. If you share that you've got an update with your mission and your vision and your goals, make sure that you update those things within your organizational profile. We'll be looking for that as well, just so everything is talking to one another. There's also an optional question here within the program details. We're asking that you tell us if there's any challenges that you'd like us to know about or ways we can support your organization in ways beyond your grant award. So thinking about things that you might be challenged by and that we could provide those resources or potential professional development down the road. The other bigger shift here in the application, and again, this is coming more from the editors, is to list 5 goals or priorities for your organization over the next 5 years. So kind of thinking future forward here. We want you to keep in mind what indicators of success might mean for these goals or priorities, ways to measure goals, and or how you would implement those goals or priorities. We're going to ask you to tell us about the timeline or the time frame for completion. These can be short-term or long-term goals. It's really up to you how you share those goals and priorities with us and what that timeline might be. Some examples of what goals and priorities that you might be thinking about including, they could be activities associated with capacity building, your finances, perhaps some board and staff development, programmatic development that you might be looking at, any kind of audience and community engagement goals, or some new initiatives that you might be thinking about. Again, we're noting here that we ask that you include at least 1 organizational goal, but again, you can include up to 5. So that's it for the kind of the meat of the application. It is, as you see, quite a bit shorter and quite a bit different from what's been what you've been submitting in the past. The one thing that really has not changed, but we want to make sure it's clear here, is the financial section. So we will be asking you to fill out a financial table, entering your income and expenses for your arts organization or your arts program for your most recently completed fiscal year. For most of you, that's going to be FY25, ending June 30th is a traditional fiscal year, or we have folks that are on a calendar year, so that would be calendar year 2024. There are more guidelines and information around what is allowable and non-allowable in terms of your income and expenses within the FY27 guidelines. Laura and I will also be providing some additional resources. We've developed templates in the past, and also happy to help anybody walking through that financial table. But again, it's really not shifted from the past. It's going to remain generally the same. So you'll see some additional resources coming your way for that. We're also asking a question in the financial section if there are any significant changes within your financial statement from the previous year. So this would be a place that if you've seen a 20% surplus or deficit change, we really would like to know about those significant changes in those income or unexpected, expenses. What caused that shift in that 20% or more change for you? There's also some attachments that you'll be required to submit. And again, not a lot of change here, but you'll be asked to provide a signed Form W-9. And we always recommend that you provide a new one at the time of your annual application. You'll be asked for your IRS letter of tax determination. If you're a government agency, you will not have that. So you can supply a different statement there. We'll be asking again for your most recently completed fiscal year financial statement, and that dovetails with the financial information within the table. So again, that would be most likely your FY25 or calendar year 24 financial statement. So we're looking for the completed fiscal or financial statement for your fiscal year. Another reminder here is that if you are under $750,000 in allowable income, you can provide a signed profit and loss or similar type of statement. So we're really looking for a finalized signed version of your financial statement. If you're over $750,000 in allowable income, you must submit audited financial statements from that year. And if you're an arts program, you actually have an additional statement. So we'll need to see a income and expense statement that directly corresponds to your arts-based program. And again, we're happy to help walk through that if that's new for you, if you're not sure, if you have some significant changes in your financials, be in touch. But for those arts programs coming in, you'll be asked to produce an arts program statement, and then you'll sign it. And that is it for the full application. So I'm going to hand it back over to Laura for some next steps.
Thank you so much, Emily. So much to go through. Very exciting stuff. So that's the new application, which is, as Emily said, quite a bit shorter than the previous version. So we're excited about that. There are some next steps that come with that full application. So like we've said a couple of times now, but just to say it again here, everyone that is submitting a GFO application for FY27 funding, everyone's doing that same application. So there's no longer the on year versus off year that varies from year to year. All of the GFO applications will be due on November 15th of each year. So you can just put that on your calendar and do a recurring, event for November 15th of every year. Like I said, through the editing process, it was really important to the editors that there is a public role in this process. But there is a new shape that role is taking. So in the past, the panelists were asked to review and score all of the on-year written applications. They also conducted what we called extension assignments, which were the artistic activity visits and the in-depth conversations. And all of that work culminated in the panel meeting where that final score was reached for every application. They went through a discussion period, all of that. So, and they landed on that score that was then a part of the funding formula. So panelists are still going to be involved in the review process, but it's going to look a little bit different. Panelists are going to be asked to review but not score written applications and complete the artistic activity visits. The staff, meaning myself and Emily, we will also be reviewing the applications but not scoring them. And we're going to take on the role of the in-depth staff conversations now. So we're still having both of those elements of the extension assignments, but they're just shifted a little bit in how they're going to work. So the artistic activity visit, that's going to be, a traditional site visit in most cases, where a panelist, a member of the public, is going to attend or view a form of your public programming. Typically, that's going to include, attending a performance, going to an exhibit, some kind of event where you are seeing that example of artistic programming from the organization. This is not scored. It's intended to show evidence of that programming that is open to the public and showing that it aligns with the written application and the organization's stated mission, vision, goals, etc. So just as in the previous times, so if you've gone through this process before, it's going to feel very similar to that. Just like it was before, the artistic quality or the excellence of the programming that they're experiencing, that's not going to be evaluated during this visit. This is really about showing that connection between the evidence of the programming and the alignment with what your application states. We're going to go into more details about what this, when this happens, how it's going to happen, all of that. Later in the year, there's going to be an entirely separate webinar about this role, but we just kind of wanted to give you a taste of what that is going to include. The staff conversation, so we're going to take on that role of the in-depth conversations that the panelists once had. So this is going to be something that happens. We're going to talk about the cycle in just a moment, but it's going to happen once every 4 years, or if you've been asked to be put into a 1-year cycle, similar to the past, how we had on years and off years and in that cycled through. This conversation is really going to be centered on either myself or Emily meeting with organizational personnel. Typically that looks like staff leadership or board members, and we're going to be really focused on discussing organizational and programmatic development, goals, etc. This conversation, we are going to have to keep it very scheduled because, as we said, we have a lot of organizations. But we're going to be looking at a 30-minute meeting with you that will happen virtually or by phone, and that will be scheduled later on. Again, we're going to have an entirely separate webinar to talk about that process, the scheduling, all of that later on, but we just wanted you to know that that is going to be a new part of the process. So how this all plays out is that in the past, like we've talked about, we used to have a 3-year cycle. And typically how that worked is you would be in an on year for 1 year, followed by 2 off years, and then an on year again. And that just cycled around, every 3 years, that rotating schedule. We're going to expand the cycle from 3 years to 4 years. So how that's going to work now is that there's still going to be that rotation depending on which year we're in. Depending on where you fall, you would do different elements of this process. So for example, in the first year, you might complete the application and have an artistic activity visit. In year 2, it would be just the application. Year 3 would be the application plus the staff conversation. and year 4 would be the application only. And then you would cycle back up to year 1 and the whole thing would continue again. Obviously, not everybody can start on the same part because that wouldn't make any sense. So depending on your artistic discipline, you'll be assigned to where you are in that cycle, and then it will rotate from there. If you're a new organization coming into the GFO program, so you've completed the application following the intent to apply process, you would be asked to complete both the artistic activity visit and the staff conversation in that first review cycle. Following that, if you are approved and you're brought into the GFO process, then you would fall into schedule depending on your artistic discipline. So here's how the cycle plays out. And this information is all in the guidelines. We've broken it down into the different artistic disciplines. And don't worry, you're going to get an email from us in the next couple of days, which shares with you, you are this organization, you are in this discipline. That means you need to do this year. So don't worry if you don't have to copy all of this right now. But you'll see that, for example, if you are a dance organization, you'll see that you're in that little group A in the slide here. That means that for this cycle, the FY27 cycle, you would be submitting an application and you will have an artistic site visit. You'll see each category of this has different artistic disciplines under it. So depending on where you are, that would be the different requirements. And then you would cycle through. So then the next year, the dance organizations would move down to that B section and you would just do the application only. The following year after that, they'd move to C and they'd have the application plus the staff conversation. And finally, D, the application only as that last part of the cycle. So just depending on where you are, you would move to the different elements that are required. Like I said, you're going to get an email from us very shortly that shares exactly what your artistic discipline and group that you're in. We do want to just make a note that some of our artistic disciplines are really, really large. So they have broken into kind of subgroups. And I'll move back a slide just so you can see it. So for example, you can see theater group 1 is in that A section. Theater group 2 is in the C section. So it's just, there's a ton of theaters. So it's just broken down into 2 groups. The groupings don't mean anything. It's alphabetical. That's just how we split it. So it's relatively even. So there are going to be some subgroupings. So we'll make sure that that's really clear to you. Also, some artistic disciplines have merged together. So for example, we used to have a category known as Music C, which doesn't really mean a lot to most people if you just say Music C. So we've now merged that into a larger music category. So again, that's one that's going to be broken down into different groups, but you'll see that there are some things that have changed. So really read that email when you get it carefully, because it will outline exactly which group you're in and what you need to do. Like I said, we're going to hold separate webinars later this fall about the artistic activity visits and the in-depth conversations. So we'll talk more about the timing of those, the scheduling of those, what to expect at that point. And this is just reiterating again that all new organizations will complete both the artistic activity visit and the in-depth conversation in their first review cycle. Oh, and just a note, I do want to say this part out loud. Any organization can also have one or both of the visits added to their review process as determined by the program director. So if there's any kind of, significant changes or, something that we feel that we need to have a discussion about or something of that nature, we would add that to your application review, much like we used to, from time to time, take an off-year organization and put them into an on-year review. Sort of a similar thing here, where we would add an element if we felt that that was necessary. And of course, that would be communicated to you as well. So looking at the timeline and how all of this plays out over the next couple of months, The intent to apply application, that opened at the beginning of August and is due, if you need to submit it, on September 15th. That's next week. Again, a reminder that this is not needed if you were approved for FY26 funding. So don't do that. Don't waste your time on that, just for new organizations. In early October, we will send the notifications out to those who were accepted from the intent to apply process. Highlighted in blue here, in early October, that's when the GFO application will open in Smart Simple. So if you go there today, you're not going to see it. We're still in the process of finishing up the build within Smart Simple. It will be available in early October. And of course, you'll receive notification from us to let you know when that is open and available. But it will be due on November 15th at 11:59 p.m. In the wintertime, the panelists will be assigned to your application if you are in one of those review cycles. And MSAC staff will begin reviewing your application and your financials as well. January through April is the window that of time when the panelists and the staff will be completing those artistic site visits and those in-depth conversations. So that's a longer window of time than usually we have been working with, just like a 4 or 5 week window. We're really looking at 4 months now. So much longer window of time for that. In May and June, that's when the recommendations for funding are made to the council by myself and by Emily. And those grant amounts are determined based on MSAC's budget. So once we have all of that information, that's when we make those determinations. And then after July 1st, that's when the notifications of all GFO grants are sent via Smart Simple. So once we officially move into FY27, that's when those notifications can happen. There will still be a final report that is associated with all of this. That's always going to be due on August the 15th. And of course, throughout this entire schedule, whenever, anytime, we are here to answer any kind of questions that you have. We're here to provide support. We know, especially this year, this is going to be a lot of transition. So if you have questions or need us for anything, please feel free to reach out. And just one kind of footnote here, just for awareness. Again, most of you, you are GFO organizations, so you are not eligible for creativity grant support for the general operating track. But just as a note, through this whole revision process, with these changes to simplify and streamline the GFO program, the creativity grant for general operating support, that will be permanently closing on December 31st of 2025. So at the end of this calendar year, that particular track of the creativity grant is going to close. So all of the general operating support for arts organizations and arts programs, it's all going to come under the GFO umbrella. So that's the main goal here, is to bring everything under that one program. The creativity grant for project-based support, that will continue in the future. Again, if you receive GFO support, this really isn't relevant to you because you would not be eligible for that creativity grant support. But just to note how things will change. If an organization is not receiving Gen Op support through GFO in the future, they can still get support for their work, just for project-based support through the creativity grant in the future. All right, it is 12:10, so I'm going to pass it over to Emily to talk some math in our funding formula.
Thanks, Laura. Yes, math. Math is involved with this program. And that comes in the form of a funding formula that has always kind of been here to determine your grant awards from year to year. Over many years, there's been really 3 primary variables within the funding formula. There's been the total allowable income, your panel percentage score, and the cap allocation score. So that total allowable income number, that's provided by you all, the organizations applying within the annual application. And it's based on that financial information that we went over. So the completion of that financial table, to get that total allowable income number, and we cross-check that with the financial statement that is provided by you. The panel score, as Laura noted earlier, that has been determined through that on your application review process every 3 years. And then the cap allocation percentage, that's really determined by the State Arts Council's GFO allocation, which mirrors the full budget allocation that we get annually. This also kind of shifts a little bit, and we'll go over this in a minute, but there's 5 different cap allocation percentages, and that's really based on your budget size or tier. So what the formula has looked like in the past, for example, if you have a $500,000 total allowable income number, say you got a 90% score in your on-year application review, and your cap allocation percentage was, say, 7%, your grant would look like $31,500. So that's how it's been operating. With this revision process, as Laura went over, there's going to be no more scoring within this process. So with that, we are removing the panel score, that panel percentage number, from the funding formula. So that gets us down to 2 numbers here. So again, that total allowable income number that's provided within your financial statements and the financials you provide, that again has not changed. And then the cap allocation percentage. So we'll multiply those 2 numbers together to get to a grant award. So again, removing that panel score from the funding formula. The other piece of this is we call this formula the equitable funding formula. And that is because a couple of years ago, we had a revision to the funding formula, specifically looking at these cap allocation percentages to kind of move in a direction of more equitable funding. And that really developed from one cap allocation percentage that was applied to every organization to dividing into 5 tiers based on your budget size to get 5 different cap allocation percentages. So the tiers here on the screen, tier 1, these are our smallest organizations. Previously, it was that $50,000 threshold up to $500,000. That's now shifted to include any organizations with $10,000 in allowable income to $500,000. Tier 2 is $500,000 to $1.5 million. Tier 3 is $1.5 million to $5 million. Tiers 4 is $5 to $10 million. And Tier 5 are organizations that are $10 million in allowable income or more. During this kind of that revision process that we only focused on this equitable funding formula, at that time, the editors recommended a 5-year transition period. So that started in FY24. We're still in that transition period, even now through this revision. So we're moving into year 4 of a 5-year transition going into FY27. So when we're thinking about the equitable funding formula, there's some other factors that we consider that also came from the editors at that time. So moving through this 5-year transition, we've started to implement cap amounts. So there's no one organization moving into year 4. So in the FY27, no one organization can get more than $1.1 million. And next year, going into the FY28 cycle, that will basically get us to our cap of $1 million. That is the kind of end goal there. There's also some transition priorities that Laura and I have taken in consideration, is that our Tier 1 groups, so those are our smallest organizations in the GFO pool, they will increase their cap allocation percentage at a faster rate during the 5-year transition. Tier 2 would be increasing steadily over 5 years. Tier 3, the mid organizations, our goal here is to keep them remaining stable during this transition. And then tiers 4 and 5, those are our largest organizations that we're not decreasing at a rate greater than 1.5% annually. So those are some guidelines that have been provided to us as well. So moving into kind of the next 3 years, in an effort to really support our budget at the State Arts Council and the GFO allocation, We want to make sure that that funding is stable over the next 3 years. So we're doing what we're calling a phase out schedule. So this is really kind of looking at our organization's past scores. So if you had a 90% or higher score in FY26, you're going to be rounded up to 100% and essentially removing that score from the formula moving into FY27. If you were an organization in FY26 that scored between an 80 and an 89%, it's going to be a 2-year transition for you to kind of remove that the panelist score from your funding formula. So in FY27, we'll round you up to 90%, and then in FY28, we'll round you up to 100% and remove that scoring element from the formula. And then finally, if you were an organization that scored between 70 and 79%, we'll do a 3-year transition here for you. So rounding up to 80, then rounding up to 90, and then removing in FY29. So you can kind of see that schedule here. So with that kind of same idea, we wanted to implement more of a phase-in schedule for any new organizations coming into the program for the first time that would fall into tiers 4 and 5. So these would be organizations that are coming into the GFO program that had not received funding from us in FY26. We'll have kind of a schedule of phasing in. So again, it's going to be probably pretty rare, then we don't expect too many, if any, coming in this category. But if there is, we want to make sure there's stability within the full pool of the organizations and the funding. So if an organization comes in at that level, we would essentially allow them to be eligible for up to 70% of their total grant award in FY27. In FY28, it would be 80%, FY29, 90%, and then in FY30, which, gosh, that seems funny to say, FY30 would be 100%, essentially removing that element from the funding formula. So again, this is just to ensure some stability within the full pool and protect all of our organizations through this process. There's also a shift in the matching requirements. Previously, all GFO grantees had a required 3-to-1 match in cash. So that excludes funds or services from the state of Maryland and also in-kind contributions. This match is checked by Laura and I as program directors at the time of a final report. So this is not something you need to necessarily worry about going into the application, but just know that it has been there and something that we check for. Moving forward, process, this did show up for our editors. So we did listen to this recommendation and think about the match requirements here. So moving forward, our organizations that are tier 1 and 2, so these are our smaller organizations under 1.5 million in total allowable income, you must provide a 1-to-1 match now, so no longer 3-to-1 for our small organizations. For tiers 3, 4, and 5, so again, our organizations that are a little larger, 1.5 million and over in allowable income, you must and services from the state of Maryland, in-kind contributions, or donated service can for the match. So we're really looking for cash matches here. All right, I'm going to pass it back to Laura for a little bit more information to wrap up.
Yep, just a couple more slides here just to run through quickly. We have a couple of frequently asked questions. I think we have likely addressed all of these in various formats throughout the presentation, but just to run through them quickly. Question that we get a lot is, I've received GFO funding for the current year, meaning FY26. Do I need to complete an intent to apply? And hopefully we can all answer together now. No, you do not have to do the intent to apply. You are already considered part of the program. So only new organizations or organizations who did not receive that funding for FY26 are required to complete the intent to apply. Often we get a question about one-time activities that need support and if that should go through GFO. Generally speaking, that's probably not a good fit. As we talked about, GFO funding is really supporting those ongoing general operations of an organization or a program. So likely another funding program would be a better fit for that one-time request for support. Do I need to submit an audit with my application? Again, we've gone through this a couple times. This really depends on the size of the organization. So all organizations have to submit a financial statement of some sort from the last completed fiscal year. Those with income under $750,000 can submit a signed statement, such as a profit and loss. Those with income over $750,000, they are required to submit a board-approved audit as part of the application. My organization's planned budget for the upcoming year is over $10,000. Can I apply for GFO funding? This is really kind of a maybe situation, but we really ask you to keep in mind that GFO program, it looks back on your most recently completed fiscal year, and it's looking back at actuals, not your budget. So when determining funding, we only review those completed financials. If the total allowable income for last year is under $10,000, then you would not be eligible for consideration at this time. So really think about looking at the last year's actuals as that baseline. And that's it for our FAQs. Just a quick walkthrough of Smart Simple. I think the majority of you are probably pretty familiar with Smart Simple. This is our grants platform, and all applications have to be submitted through Smart Simple. So that would be, to get to that, you would need to go to marylandarts.smartsimple.com. If you haven't already registered with Smart Simple, you would need to set up that profile to apply. So when you go to marylandarts.smartsimple.com, again, the vast majority of you are going to put in your email address and your password and log in. If you do need to register, you would want to click that blue register button where it says new to the system. And that's just going to walk you through a series of questions to set up your basic contact information and some other details about your organization. So once you get registered and logged in, you would come to your main dashboard, which would look something along these lines. And what you want to look for is the opportunities section. So in this screenshot, it has a number 2 above it. That number would vary just depending on the number of applications that are open at that time. But you would want to click on opportunities, and an entire list of all of the different applications that are available to you would open up. What you'll want to look for is the Grants for Organizations application. Again, it's not open right now, so don't look for it today. But in early October, you're going to look for Grants for Organizations in this list, and then you would want to click the corresponding blue Apply Now button. That would then open up the entire application for you. And it pretty much just walks you through all of the different sections and all of the different questions within it. You do need to hit Save Draft to kind of start the application. That's going to open it for you. So make sure you click Save Draft. The system does auto-save. That's a semi-new feature for Smart Simple, but we always encourage you to save throughout just to make sure there's not a glitch or something like that so you don't lose everything. So we do encourage you to just kind of periodically click Save Draft to make sure you're good to go. And then once that application is completed, you would click the blue Submit button, and that would then lock in everything and send it over to us, and we would have that for review. Just a couple of things to point out here before we move into some questions, and I see some questions coming in the chat, so we'll be sure to get to those shortly. Again, this was recorded today, so we will share this on the website, and we will also share it, if you are a current grantee, we'll share it through our email lists to you. It will take a couple of days just to process and to get everything uploaded and available on YouTube. So we will make sure that that is shared out for you. We will also likely be holding a similar session in early October that will be most the same content, but will really be focused just on the application, specifically for those people that were accepted through the intent to apply process, just to walk them through what the application looks like. So if you feel like you need to get, another walkthrough of the application, you can feel free to join us. That's not scheduled quite yet, but it will be in early to mid-October. We're also going to be holding several virtual office hours throughout the fall. Those are just going to be informal, kind of open meetings with both myself and Emily, so that any grantees and applicants can feel free to drop in, ask questions, hear questions that other people are asking, that sort of thing, so we can hopefully address some things all together instead of just having one-off conversations. So we'll send a schedule of what that looks like. We're going to have a couple of them leading up to the deadline. So keep an eye out for that shortly. All right. I think that is everything we could possibly tell you right now about the application and the revision process. But I do see that there are a bunch of questions coming in. So Emily, do you want to start? I don't know where the beginning of the list is. So
yeah, and I was kind of just, thanks everybody for all these great questions. I'm seeing some themes here. So I'm going to start with Sarah. Thanks, Sarah, for being here. And just some questions around the financial tiers and changes in cap allocation percentages over the next couple of years. First off, yes, your tier can change from year to year. So if you are kind of on that bubble, you might be tier 2 one year, maybe tier 3 the next year, and then your cap allocation percentage would change along with that. There will likely be some changes in the cap allocation percentages, and I saw Eliza, you noted that as well. Because we're removing an entire variable, there's going to be definitely some shifts in what the cap allocation will look like. There's also some other variables that we mentioned. So kind of thinking about that phase out schedule over the next 3 years, there's going to be groupings of folks based on their past scores. So there'll be kind of that slow phase out as well. The intention here is that we're not doing anything that's going to cause a drastic shift in your cap allocation percentages. So we really have to think about all those variables. And then also we don't get our budget allocation until much later in the year. So as we near the actual fiscal year, so in the spring, Laura and I really can't even start doing all the math that we mentioned until we get that kind of number. And the cap allocation percentage is really the last thing that we figure out, just to ensure that we can get all the funding we're allocated out to you all as organizations and kind of think about all those different variables in play. But we can certainly think about, sharing some more information and outlook on that moving forward. And Diane, you also had something kind of around the tiers and the financials here too. If you're an organization that's been in the GFO program, your last on-year score is what we would be looking at in terms of kind of that phase out schedule. So depending on what you scored in your last on year, so if you were in an on year in FY24, that was the last time, we'll be looking at that score and what your phase out schedule would be in terms of the panel percentage. I think I hit all of the financial stuff.
There is a question here, just kind of in that same theme, that asks, could you say more about the financial document outside from profit and loss or audited financial statements needed for arts organizations? So that's, Bria, that financial document, that if you're a smaller organization, what that would be a profit and loss statement that from your last completed fiscal year that's signed by your treasurer or your whoever's in charge of your finances. And then if you are a larger organization, that would need to be an official audit, an external audit that was completed and board approved. So you would have one or the other, just depending on the size of the organization. And those are really the only financial documents. Based on those documents, you would complete the financial table. So it basically, it just corresponds to the information that are on those statements or audits. It would just be completing a table to give that information to us. But that would be it.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll note, because we also get this question somewhat frequently, and come across it, that we cannot accept 990s. So I know a lot of organizations, you obviously have to complete those documents, but that's not a financial statement that we accept. So just want to say that up front if you're thinking about that as an option.
And certainly if you have questions, Frida, about what you need to submit, or if this is right, or what have you, please feel free to reach out to us, and we're happy to talk one-on-one as well.
There's also some questions here. Sarah, you asked about kind of just the change in organizational contacts. Also be in touch with us if that does happen. So we know about it, and we're communicating with the best people and the best emails. But there's a way to shift that in Smart Simple. You can go into the person's profile and update that information, or we can also help with that. Just send us a note, and we can help you through that process. There's also a question from Karen around the intent to apply that graphic organizational chart. We really are looking for a graphic, really just to see the structure itself. So not necessarily a listing of folks and their role, but really kind of how it looks visually. And if you've got questions about that, we can help with that and support you. Thanks for the support in here too, folks. Kristen asked about when we'll be able to download the application questions. And Laura and I are working on that. We typically will get at that as a resource as well on the website. So we'll be working on that in the next couple of weeks. So that's available to you if you want to start your application early, even before it opens up. And I think there were some hands raised. I don't know if we need to go back to that list. Looks like they're gone. So must have answered questions. I think I see Marshall, your hand raised.
Good morning or afternoon now. Marshall Clark from Access Art. I put this in the chat as well, but if you're doing away with scoring, right? So you're not, the panel's doing away with the scoring, you said, and you all are not going to score. How are you evaluating one application to another, or who to fund? I'm assuming you can't fund everybody. So how are you making determinations, and what are those criteria, and can we see those criteria before the application is due? Did you catch all that?
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I didn't see Laura. If she was gonna to address that first off, but really we're focused on eligibility and compliance. So what we shared today is really the criteria. So if somebody is not in compliance, and then we would consider addressing those organizations. But essentially the way that the funding formula is set up, that if everybody is in compliance and eligible and meets all the requirements of the application, we're going to apply that formula. So that's kind of why we think of this kind of more holistically as a pool of funding and a pool of organizations that are going to get that funding. So when we talk about that cap allocation percentage, that shifts just with all the variables in place. So our goal really is to get funding out to the organizations. And we have our public panelists, the person doing the site visits, that's also thinking about the public programming and making sure things are happening, and we'll be kind of have a checklist of things they'll be looking for in terms of eligibility and compliance. So yeah, that's kind of the idea, is to remove those scoring elements and that kind of scoring criteria. And Karen, I see your hand.
Yes, I guess it's good afternoon. I had a question on the letter of intent. I did not get to go to that session that you had, but I couldn't find the webinar recording. Could you point me to maybe where that is?
Yeah, we can probably drop that into the chat. And it's also just for reference, there's a section called application assistance on the new grantee page. So it is there, but we can drop it in the chat for you too.
Somehow I missed it. I don't know.
Okay.
And then the other thing is, since this is our first time doing the letter of intent application, is there a way to have you review it before we hit submit? I don't have all the financials in there yet, but all the verbiage I think is in there.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's something you can do.
we are typically, available to review applications to share feedback. I will say that the intent to apply is largely yes or no questions, and it is not scored. So, we can certainly take a glance, just at completion, make sure that everything's there. But I'll also add that if there was something that we ran across in the intent to apply that we were not clear on, or we felt we needed more information, we would reach out to you. So it wouldn't be necessarily a hard stop just because, of how something was answered. So just know that as well, that that we would be in communication.
Okay. Well, then maybe it's not that big of a deal.
I'm dropping the link here for you as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I'm trying to get back to the chat and where we left off, but I completely lost it.
Yeah, I think let's see. I see question from Askader. I don't know, or wherever you're at, Laura. Go ahead.
Just before Askader, Kristen asks, we may not have our FY25 audit done by November 15th. Can we use our FY24 one? There is a note, we didn't actually say this within the presentation, but in the guidelines, it does share that if you are an organization that requires an audit and the audit is still underway by November, by the deadline, there is the ability to submit that at a later time through March, I believe, March 1st.
Mhm.
So there is a little bit of a buffer window because we know that audits are frequently being wrapped up in the later part of the fall. So we really need the last completed fiscal year. We'd rather not go back 2 years. So there would be that option to submit it later.
And I'll just tag on to that. We'll send notes and reminders in an email about that too. So we do ask that you notify us if you are not, if you're in the audit process and you won't have it by that date.
Great. That was my question, Emily. This is Chanel. Exactly. Like, how do we note that in the application if, it's like pending, we'll submit later in March? Is that just an email we send you?
Yep.
Or I don't know if the attachment section is a mandatory one. I just don't want any of us to get stuck and can't move forward if we can't upload that immediately before the deadline. Thanks.
Yeah, that it's a simple email to Laura and myself, depending on who your program director is. So Chanel, that would be me. And when there is a requirement to attach a financial statement. So rather than submitting your past audit, submitting a profit and loss statement. So we really get a sense of what your most recently completed fiscal year numbers are, and that you can submit your financial table in alignment with your last completed fiscal year, and then sending that audit at a later date. And if any shifts or changes need to be made at that time, we'll at least have a good base for what to expect in that last completed fiscal year. But again, just be in touch and we can walk through that together. Let's see here. I think we can go into this question about from Askader. For the question about the 5 goals, could you elaborate a bit more on what you would be looking for? I can see our organization having a hard time selecting only 5 from our long list. Yeah, I mean, Laura, feel free to chime in, but I think this is really, it's up to you, kind of thinking about, again, those measurable goals where you might have some indicators of success to think about. And again, it could be a combination of short-term and long-term goals. We're also thinking about how that might tie to your final report. So it's something that you might be able to report out on. Something that you might want to have a conversation about with the two of us for a staff check-in, or things that we might be able to support with from the State Arts Council perspective. I would maybe recommend just prioritizing, some of those 5 goals for the year. And again, this is intended to be an annual application question. So if you want to focus on maybe the short term, and then you might have a new set the following year, but we can also talk about that one-on-one. I don't know if there's anything else there, Laura, for you.
No, I think that completely covers it. And just to echo what Emily said, there will be a connection in the final report to those goals. So there'll be that will kind of close the loop a little bit on a goal. Not that it needs to necessarily be finished, but there will be kind of an update section in the final report connected to the goals. So you'll see that later on. So that might be something to think about as well. Just kind of rolling down the chat here, a question from Sarah. For the artistic activity visit, we've usually had the panelists come to a rehearsal because those occur every week and it's easier to schedule for our panelists. But I'm seeing the emphasis is on open to the public. Of course, the choir is open to the public to audition for. So would you prefer the panelists attend the performance? And if so, is a recording okay? Yeah, Sarah, I mean, and we will get into what qualifies, as an artistic activity visit, and all of those things as we get a little bit down the road in the process, and we have the separate webinar on that. But the main emphasis is being able to share the artistic programming with the panelists. So while of course a rehearsal is a part of that process, we really kind of want the panelists to be able to experience the programming as a member of the public. So just as an audience member would. We know that there's going to be scheduling challenges. Not every single organization is going to have something occurring, in that January through April timeframe. So of course there are going to be different, versions and, different things that, will be accepted. But our hope is that because we are opening that window quite a bit from January to April, that there would be, a concert or an event or something like that would be able to work out. So again, we'll talk about more specifics, as we get into that portion of it. But I would say that, if possible, if it works with your schedule, and everything, the preference would probably be to have them attend a concert, an event, a something that's happening, just so they can experience your organization.
Great, and there's a couple other kind of quick questions here. Kristen asked, will you tell us what our panel score was so we know what to expect? Yeah, we can tell you your previous panel score anytime. Just send us an email and we can get that to you if you're not aware of what it was in your last on-year review. Angela asked, will you be sharing a scoring rubric for the staff application? Again, there's not going to be a scoring rubric necessarily. We will have a series of questions and kind of themes that we'll want to talk about through the staff review, and we certainly will share those in advance. I think we addressed the audit question from Randy. Having a Word document with the new program questions and prompts. Yep, we will put that up there soon. Joanne, hi Joanne. Thank you for that kind notes there. Thanks everybody for, a lot of love. Thanks. Matt, with the funding formula correct, the total allowable income will continue to be based on the organization's audited actual income from most recently completed fiscal year. Yes, you got that. So you'll continue to submit an annual financial statement with the application each year. And then again, at what point during the year can orgs learn about their cap allocation percentage for the next cycle? This again, it happens later in the year, just with how our budgeting process works at the state level, and then that trickles down to us as a state agency. We typically do not learn what our budget allocation is until the spring. So we do all the pre-work in the application, and this is literally one of the last things we do before we make recommendations to the council. So in the spring this year, we did open up our grants committee meeting. That is our council committee, and that's usually in May. And we'll do that again. We'll make sure that folks know that you can attend and you can kind of get that first opportunity to listen in on what your the cap allocations would be for the year. And Lisa, yes, the artistic staff and artistic visits and the staff conversations will be conducted between January and April, generally speaking, each year. I think those are the quick questions. And then I see Janelle, you have a hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. Just I'm recovering from COVID, so excuse the voice. Get your boosters, people, if you are able to. Just a question about how the reason that you are doing goals, which I think are great for you to do. And I want to say thank you. This, as somebody who has written hundreds of grants as a consultant, this goes a long way towards equity, and not everybody can afford somebody like me who has written hundreds of grants. And I think that, you know, moving away from scoring people's grammar and that kind of thing leads to way more equitable funding practices. So the work you guys have done is amazing and incredibly appreciated. I want to be out of a job someday. So my question about the reason for the goals, if you're not scoring, and that is it basically so that you can review the reports and see how organizations are doing, so that you can then determine whether or not you need to, you know, do a site visit or have an in-depth conversation and that type of thing. Is that your purpose for having the goals in there as a new question? I'm just curious how that's going to be used.
Yeah, I think, hi, Janelle. I'm so sorry that you're not feeling well. So get well. You know, I think that is certainly part of it. That the goals really, that suggestion really came directly from the editors and that process. That was something that came up through them, that having that information felt like that was essential information that, you know, that would really help us in understanding an organization, you know, and what they're working towards, whether that's short-term, long-term, you know, what they're thinking about, what, you know, what's coming up for them. So, you know, it really came directly from that. Like you said, they're not evaluated. So it's really kind of looking at that, you know, how an organization is working through its goal setting with having, you know, the stated goals and then the follow-up in the final report. So, you know, it gives us kind of a better picture, I think, of where an organization is going and how they're working through that. So it's really, I find it that it's informational for us to really get that full sense of an organization. It can also help guide us in our conversations with those organizations, whether that's through the staff conversation in this formalized setting or in an informal setting, you know, just so that we're able to kind of be in the loop and be, you know, a part of that process. So I feel like that's kind of where the genesis of it was. And Emily, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you covered it. And, you know, we also, as a State Arts Council, kind of connected to our strategic plan is, you know, really to support our organizations and our artists across the state in a variety of ways, and thinking about non-financial, non-funding ways, how we can support you all and just make sure the whole sector is strengthened and feels supported. So, you know, if we're hearing some of the same things coming out of our GFO pool of organizations, that might lead us to taking steps to professional development or some other changes. So we do want to know what you're focused on and what's changing and what you think is valuable for your organization. Because again, it just provides more information, like Laura said, to help us guide and support you in a better way.
Thank you. That helps me to focus on kind of where, which 5 goals to pick.
Yeah, certainly. Okay, I think we're winding down here. These are excellent questions. For those of you that are still with us, thanks for staying with us. I don't see anybody else's hand raised.
Yep, I think we've gotten everything in the chat or by hands raised.
Yeah.
Guess we'll just do a final call here for any last thoughts.
And I will note, and if you know us at the State Arts Council and Laura and I, we are all about kind of listening to you all for feedback. Evaluation of these shifts and changes are going to be really important. So if you feel, like you need to share something with us about the process, we do anticipate there's probably going to be some changes ahead, just based on how everything is going at this point. But please feel free to be in touch with, those kind of questions or thoughts or feedback that you might have throughout the entire process, the application and moving forward into those additional requirements, reporting, all those things. So just keep that in the back of your head as well.
All right. Well, we so appreciate you all taking time. We know this was a lot of information and a lot of us talking at you. So we appreciate you joining us today. Like Emily said, if you have any questions at all, any feedback at all, anything like that, we are certainly here for all of that. We will be holding many other sessions. We'll have other recordings available, other ways to engage throughout this process to make sure everybody understands what we're doing when we're doing it. So be on the lookout for that in the coming weeks and months. But thank you all so very much. We're excited to work with you through this new process. Emily, anything else?
No, just thanks for all you do.
All right. Well, thank you all. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we will talk to you soon.